Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your Panda Hub. This is
Recording in progress.
The fourth edition of a fantastic report, and this is A Force for Nature. I am really pleased to be here to my left with Marco Lambertini. He's the Director General of WWF International. I'm also very pleased to have virtually Anne-Lara Gaudry. She's the Executive Secretary of IPBES. She's going to be joining us virtually, and so you'll hear her remarks on the screen. Then to the left, we have Abraham Barsosio. He's the Country Executive Committee from Elgeyo Marakwet County in Kenya. And then to the left, George Foster. He's the Deputy Director, Strategy, Campaigns and Engagement for Biodiversity and Climate of the UK Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And I like how you guys join these things up quite nicely. Big names and titles, but actually they're all joined together. And we're also going to have one of our core consultants for this report, Hasib Bakhtari. He's from Climate Focus. He's also going to be joining us virtually today. So what we're going to do is a first round of remarks around the report, and then we'll go to direct questions to the panelists that I have here with me today. And also we'll have time for a few questions from the floor or from our virtual audience. So prepare your questions, please. And without more ado, Marco, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and welcome everybody to this event. For us, it's a really important event because it's going to highlight the role of nature in fighting the climate crisis. So in COP26 this week, we had a number of confirmations, and one of those is definitely that achieving net zero is, on one hand, a crucial imperative for humanity, but on the other hand, it's going to be tough. And the reason is that we are simply late. And the later we are, of course, the later we are in responding, the tougher it's going to be. And for that reason, it's important on one hand that we all put our hands on deck, meaning governments, businesses, investors, consumers all have to play a role. But on the other hand, we also need to deploy a range of solutions to the climate crisis, from redirecting investment, private and public, towards a net zero outcome, as well as changing lifestyles, and of course embracing technological solutions. But also, what comes very strongly from this COP, perhaps more than any other COP, is that we cannot forget the oldest and most effective technology available today for carbon capture and storage, which is nature. And it is clear today the role that nature can play in tackling the climate crisis. 30% of the mitigation solutions to climate change are connected to nature, conservation and restoration. Nature until now have absorbed half of the emissions that humans have emitted in the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And even in the last 10 years, when human emissions have reached a record high, nature has continued to be able to absorb half of those emissions. Its contribution is immense already, but we already have signals that actually this can go on forever, because as well as emitting emissions in the atmosphere, we are also affecting the ecosystems of our planet. We have lost half of the forest, half of the coral reefs, 85% of wetlands, and so on and so forth. We have been affecting biodiversity. And so the ability of nature to play its role in contributing to mitigate climate change is weakening because of our impact on biodiversity. And so it's critical that we combine in our plan to reach a net zero achievement and stay within 1.5, it's critical that we increase our attention on nature conservation and nature restoration. The report that we're launching today is exactly trying to assess the commitment through an analysis of the NDCs that many countries have already put forward, and more are coming in, actually come in since the publication of the report. And it's sending us a relatively encouraging message. 90%, more than 90% of the NDC presented refer to nature-based solutions. More than 70% of those commitments are actually are attaching a measurable target about nature-based solution interventions. There is a 30% increase in these commitments referring to the ocean nature-based solutions. Because, you know, when we talk about nature-based solutions, we think about forest on land, but there are the blue forests in the ocean, kelp, seagrass, mangroves, that play a super important role. And the ocean, frankly, has been kept out of the climate conversation for too long, and it's great to see it coming in. And also another new dimension is that 30 of these NDCs, over 100, have made explicit reference to the role that local communities and indigenous people can play in implementing nature-based solutions. So this is quite exciting, but there is also another couple of messages coming out from the NDCs which are quite exciting. First of all is that nature-based solutions references are across the board, developed economies, developing economies, emerging economies, from the UK, the EU, to Kenya, Cape Verde, Rwanda, Seychelles, and many others. So it's really a commitment that cuts across the whole world. And also that there are increasing references to in the NDCs to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals and to the delivery of the biodiversity targets that we are going to that we have today under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and we will be renewing next year in April in Kunming with a new set of targets for 2030. And that's important because this reference shows that also we are beginning to integrate more and more the climate, the nature, and the overall development agenda. So let me finish by saying that so what we need to see after this, we think, very encouraging signal from the strong reference of nature in the NDCs, we need to see, first of all, of course, a very strong focus on implementation. And we're going to work hard with many of our partners and peers in the NGO, civil society, non-state actor movement to hold government accountable to implement the commitments they already made on nature-based solutions, but at the same time to improve the quality of those commitments and making sure that those commitments deliver both on climate promises but also on biodiversity and development opportunities. The co-benefit principle that I think is so important in the work that we do around climate. The second part is that COP26 could set the stage for a process of ratcheting up, so improving both quantity and quality of these commitments by 2025 when we're going to have a further review, but also set the stage for the other twin convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, to match the ambition of the nature-based solutions commitment made in COP26. And thirdly, there is the issue of financing. We really want to see more finance flowing into this nature-based solutions commitment embedded in NDCs. Today, 8% of the climate finance is somehow connected to nature-based solutions. We can do better, we can do more, government can do more, business can do more, investors can do more. We have some great example of government pledging up to 30% of their finance climate towards nature-based solutions. So, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have the awareness. The awareness has never been greater of where we need to do, what we need to do. It's now a question of really focusing on implementation, and I think with the help of all sectors involved in this huge but winnable challenge over climate change, and will win in a way that derives benefits for other great challenges like the biodiversity crisis, as well the development imperatives. I think we have the opportunity to step up and scale up the investment in nature to support an ambitious climate agenda. We are excited, but as I said, implementation and execution is going to be the test for as usual, for these big commitments made this week in COP. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Marco. So we're making progress, important progress. We need to do more, and policy alignment will be key, and of course implementation. So I turn now over to Hasib Bakari. He's going to be joining remotely, and you're going to hear from him more of the details of the study, some of the numbers that Marco mentioned, and unpacking this fourth edition, which you can also see some nice things in comparisons with the other editions. All of them are available online. And so this accounts for 114 NDCs. So Hasib, over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you also, Marco, for that introduction to the findings of the report. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining today. As Vanessa mentioned, I'll illustrate some of our findings from this report. But first, I want to reiterate what Marco just said. We need to protect and restore our natural ecosystems, including forests, grasslands, peatlands, oceans, and others to really have a chance at meeting the Paris Agreement targets. These natural solutions to climate change could offer up to 1/3 of climate change mitigation that we need under the Paris Agreement. They also have large adaptation potential and sustainable development co-benefits, and there is increasing recognition of these benefits by governments, the private sector, and everyone. To understand how nature is considered in the climate plans of parties to the Paris Agreement, we assess the level of integration of nature-based solutions in their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Next slide, please. These are some of the nature-based solutions that are out there, and countries and we all can use to fight climate change and also avail the co-benefits. Next slide, please. We reviewed 114 updated NDCs of 140 parties to the Paris Agreement, that is 113 countries plus the EU 27, that was submitted up until October 12 this year, and we compared these to their previous versions. What we did was we reviewed the text of these documents, that's the NDCs. We assessed and found mentions of nature-based solutions along 6 criteria. 1, whether nature-based solutions were included in the mitigation measures. 2, whether nature-based solutions were included in the adaptation measures. 3, whether nature-based solutions, whether there were numerical targets for nature-based solutions in the NDCs. 4, which ecosystems were included and mentioned in mitigation and adaptation measures in the NDCs. 5th, what national policies and global policies and processes relevant to nature-based solutions were mentioned, if any. And 5th, whether the role of indigenous peoples and local communities were mentioned in relation to nature-based solution. For this criteria, we differentiated between clearly mentioned, not clearly mentioned, and not mentioned at all, as sometimes there are vague mentions of indigenous peoples and local communities, and sometimes it's clearly mentioned in relation to nature-based solution. We then compared our findings for the updated and previous indices of each country and analyzed which countries had improved or degraded or did not change at all. Next slide, please. Overall, more updated indices made references to nature-based solutions when compared to the previous indices. 92% of updated indices mentioned nature-based solutions, compared to 82% of previous indices. As you can see on the map, for 85 parties, we saw an improved integration of nature-based solutions based on those criteria that I mentioned earlier in the updated indices compared to previous indices. While for 10, there was no change, and for 19 parties, we also saw a decline, and you see these in orange in the map. Progress is similar across continents, as Marco mentioned, as well as income groups. This indicates increased attention to nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as an indication of sharing of technical and financial capacities and support among countries in revising and updating and enhancing NDCs, but also a role that civil society and NGOs have played in supporting developing countries in revising their NDCs and targets. Countries that did not mention nature-based solution in their previous indices, but did mention it in their updated indices, were mostly European countries and high-income countries. That is to say that developing countries and the global South countries had already mostly included nature-based solutions in their previous indices. For example, United States, EU/UK, they did not mention nature-based solutions in the previous indices, but did explicitly note the importance of nature-based solutions and nature in the updated indices. While Costa Rica already displayed a strong commitment to nature-based solution and nature-based approaches in the previous NDC with ecosystem-based adaptation measures, as well as numerical targets for increasing forest coverage. The updated NDC deepens this nature-based solution approach and includes coastal wetlands as carbon sink and mitigation measures and targets, refers to relevant global processes and conventions, and stresses the importance of role that indigenous people play in ecosystem conservation. The increase, as you can see in this slide, the increase in uptake of nature-based solutions can be seen mostly in mitigation measures. 96 updated NDCs mention nature-based solution mitigation compared to 80 previous indices. The number of submissions mentioning, excuse me, nature-based solution in relation to adaptation also increased from 85 to 91 NDCs. Next slide, please. Nature-based solution related numerical targets have also increased. The inclusion of numerical targets is important because this shows the level of ambition and also makes progress measurable against those targets. The numerical targets is, for example, reducing deforestation by a percentage or an area, or by declaring specific marine ecosystems as protected under the laws. 69 updated indices have such quantified numerical targets for nature-based solutions, but these are mostly for forest sector. The comparison with previous submissions also shows a positive trend, as 21 additional parties have included quantified targets for nature-based solutions. The prevalence of numerical targets increased on all continents, with the sharpest noticed in Oceania. And in relation to the types of ecosystems included in the NDCs, we saw an increased diversity of ecosystems included in both adaptation and mitigation measures. While previous indices mainly mentioned forests, updated indices often included a range of different ecosystems, but forest still remains the most omnipresent. The increased diversity of ecosystems mentioned shows an increased interest and acknowledgement of the role of other nature-based solutions in forestry, such as blue carbon systems, including oceans, as well as the role of other ecosystems like grasslands. There is a particularly notable increase in the mention of wetlands, as Marco mentioned, as well as marine ecosystems, as you can see in this graph. Also, something that's notable is the mention of seagrass. Seagrass was mentioned in only 6 previous indices, while 14 updated indices include seagrass as part of the nature-based solution in the fight against climate change. Next slide, please. Indigenous people and local communities, as we know, can play an important role in protecting and in sustainable use of natural ecosystems. since they have a strong and standing relationship with these ecosystems, as well as a deep understanding of how these ecosystems work. Therefore, the inclusion of indigenous people and local communities in relation to nature-based solutions and NDCs is really important in making sure that implementation of these solutions are successful. And we have seen improved mention of indigenous people and local communities in relation to nature-based solutions and natural ecosystems in NDCs when we compare the updated NDCs to the previous submissions. 30 parties explicitly refer to the role of indigenous peoples and other local communities in planning as well as in implementation of nature-based solution measures. And this is an increase by 14 NDCs, reflecting increasing attention to the role of these groups. Next slide, please. Some of our key recommendations, Marco already alluded to these, and I just want to reiterate and put it there on the screen that these are recommendations for including nature and nature-based solutions in our excuse me, fight against climate change. These recommendations also highlight how nature-based solutions can be ambitiously and effectively included in the UNFCCC processes and in the future NDC and their implementation. And I want to reiterate one of the recommendations that Marco mentioned, and that is the role of finance in implementing these measures that are included in NDCs, and also ratcheting implementation efforts and not just having these measures in paper in the text of NDCs. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Hasib. So more ecosystems, that's a critical one. You can see here very intentionally the blue and the green besides the green. You can also, from Hasib numbers, you can also recognize more groups, as Marco said, and of course the importance of aligned policy frameworks and finance. So let me now turn over to Anne. Probably is going to be a good connection to Marco's speech. Anne, thank you so much for joining us today. So thinking about the place of nature in climate with all of its contributions, what do you think, where are we, and why this convergence agenda is important? Over to you, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Greetings to my fellow panelists and to our audience, and many thanks to WWF for the opportunity to speak about the important role of biodiversity in climate action. I'd like to draw the 4 points that I'm about to make from the IBES global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services, as well as from the recent workshop report from IBES and IPCC, which was released back in June, which was co-hosted by the UK and by Norway. And it was the first ever collaboration between IBES and IPCC. First, I would like to flag the fact that nature and biodiversity are deteriorating at a rate and scale unprecedented in human history. We've spoken in particular about 1 million plant and animal species threatened with extinction out of an estimated total of about 8 million. And the fact that this loss in biodiversity is affecting the capacity of ecosystems to provide a number of contributions, such as the capacity of ecosystems to pollinate crops, or to control erosion, or to indeed regulate climate. And as you may have heard, not a single one of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets have been reached in 2020 at the global level. So secondly, what causes this? So climate change is currently the third direct driver of biodiversity loss, but projected to become by mid-century the first direct driver. The first two current drivers of biodiversity loss are land use change for land and that includes, of course, deforestation and the overexploitation of natural resources in the ocean, such as overfishing. And of course, there are underlying causes to these direct causes, and these relate to overconsumption of materials and of energy, and particularly in developed countries. There are many documented impact of climate change on biodiversity. I will not go into details, but just mentioning that we're documenting shifts in species distribution. They are moving towards the poles when they can, and sometimes if they cannot, that results in local extinctions, and we've all heard about loss of coral reefs, for example. My third point is that biodiversity should not only be seen as being impacted by climate change, but really as being a major part of the solution to climate change. And this is really squarely at the center of what we are discussing today. One of the main conclusions of the IBES IPCC co-sponsored workshop report was that protecting, restoring, and sustainably using biodiversity can make an important contribution to climate mitigation and adaptation. And these indeed are the nature-based solutions. Currently, natural ecosystems absorb about 1/3 of annual greenhouse gas emissions, but much more could be done. There are options to do so. So the protection of nature and the actual reduction of deforestation can significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions. I insist on actual deforestation, which can actually be different from reversing forest loss. So the 30% of land and ocean surface protection by 2030, currently being discussed in the context of the COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention, could go a long way towards protecting biodiversity and towards improving climate mitigation. But restoring carbon and species-rich ecosystems are also an important option, as well as adopting sustainable agricultural practices that use less fertilizer, less pesticides, and take a better care of the soils. So all of these measures, and there are others, of course, can either avoid greenhouse gas emissions, or they can increase the capacity of ecosystem to sequester carbon, to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and thus mitigate against climate change. And my fourth and last point, which is a very important point, is that there are some climate mitigation and adaptation measures which can have negative impacts on biodiversity, on nature's contributions to people, and should therefore be avoided. I'll give two examples. One is the massive deployment of bioenergy crops, so at large scales, and this is envisaged in most global future scenarios in the IPCC 1.5 degree report, because this massive deployment of bioenergy crops will compete for land with natural ecosystems and threaten biodiversity and also food security, in fact. And the other negative example is the large-scale planting of trees in ecosystems that, especially those that were not recently forest. I'm speaking about afforestation. We hear about a lot of degradation of habitats to be compensating by planting trees. So planting trees is discussed a lot at COP26, and that can be a good thing, but it needs to take into account a number of ecological and also societal considerations. Otherwise, they can lead to, and that has been seen, there are examples in the reports, that can lead to reduce local freshwater availability, that can look to the spread of new invasive diseases, and that can also cause local people to be dispossessed of access to their land. So just to conclude, really, the world is experiencing climate warming, climate change. It is also experiencing another environmental crisis, which is the biodiversity crisis, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of the contributions that it provides to people. These are two crises which are interconnected. They are mutually reinforcing, and they can only be solved if addressed together. COP26 is promising in the sense that it is really talking in a prominent way about deforestation, about restoration of natural ecosystems, and COP15, which is coming up for biodiversity next year, will also talk about these two issues, which is also promising because it brings together two issues which should not be considered separately. So with this, I thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
And thank you so much for those reflections. Definitely, we're seeing that convergence, and we're also worried about climate undermining the potential that biodiversity can have. Now let me turn to Kenya. So it is very interesting. We have a country from the south and we have a country from the north. And so Kenya is one of the countries that clearly in the report has improved and enhanced their NDCs through nature, so including more ecosystems, also more measurable targets. So I would like to hear from Abraham, what are the highlights that you can give us, and also your reflections on the opportunities and the challenges you see for even going further. Abraham, over to you.
Thank you so much. One thing that I want to mention is that after reading this well-researched and well-done report by WWF on NDCs and a force for nature, I think this moved my heart and soul at the same time. And one of the biggest issues, as I even look into its recommendations, that kept coming back in my mind is a big question to all of us who are in Glasgow today attending the COP26 conference, is what are we going home with at the end of this? Are we going home with a bag full of excuses, promises, and adaptations measures? Or we are going home with a bag full of mitigation measures? For me, if we are able to go home and to be able to do a lot of mitigation measures, I think that is the best, because the damage has already been done. Let us adapt to those damages that have been done, and we try to mitigate so that we are able to avoid a lot of further damage. Let me take a minute to give an overview on how NDCs trickle up and not down. A case for my country and homeland, Kenya, where I come from. And this one trickling upwards from communities, it goes to the national level and to the regional, and as it gets us at the global level. If you go to the county where I come and represent, that is Elgeyo Marakwet County and other counties, we have the county integrated development plans that are put in place. And looking into it, every sector, from health to climate change and environment sector, health, where we are today and what we need to focus mostly is on conservation. And as we look on the nature-based solutions to be able to assist us more. And one of the good projects that is we are undertaking is on the climate smart agriculture. And it is doing wonderful work, touching the souls of the communities at the community level as it goes down, and even adding to the national, to the NDCs at the national level. Tree growing, we are moving away from tree planting, and we want to make sure that we are able to do the tree growing. It is not an issue of just going to plant a tree and you just go. Ensure that you are able to plant that tree and ensure that tree grows. And we've been given a target, each county, we've been given a target of 42.5 million trees to be grown for us to be able to achieve the target that Kenya has set of achieving 10% forest cover. As it stands today, we are at 6-point-something% in terms of forest cover. A county that I come from, we are at 37.49% in terms of forest cover, but His Excellency the Governor has given us a target, which is in our CIDP, to be able to achieve a 60% forest cover by the year 2023, which is achievable looking at the way the land is, because 50% of our land is public land, and then the rest is community and privately owned. So if we are able to do a lot of agroforestry in private farms, if we are able to do proper management in community lands, then I think we will be able to achieve this. We all know the potential of nature-based solutions and the positive ripple effects that it will have on achieving our NDCs targets, especially if local communities and the indigenous communities are at the center of this. If we are able to bring these people at the center of this, then I think achieving all this will be much easy. But we also know the disparity and the discrimination that comes with climate funding. And this is a sad one for me, because if you look at this example that we have now over 100 billion US dollars in terms of promises that is coming out clearly from COP26. But my biggest question and my biggest concern is, what does the developing countries, like my country, for example, get? We only get 10% of this to be able to ensure that NDCs are achieved. And if you look at our report, the recommendation that is there, it is 30%. We need to change this if for sure we are very serious that we want to achieve and to be able to afford on the issues that comes with climate change. So the 10% of any climate change, that isn't fair. Of course it is not. This won't help us bounce back. Let us follow the recommendations of this report, and for sure I'll tell you that COP26 will be a reality to all of us. Asante sana, and God bless you. Thank you.
Abraham, thank you very much. Now we turn to George. Also, the UK is one of the NDCs that updated its NDC to the previous one, using ecosystems and nature-based solutions, more ecosystems as well. What can you tell us? And also the other finding of the report is that countries from the south are including nature-based solutions in a fastest rate than the north. So what can you tell about the UK experience? Why is biodiversity ramping up the agenda so quickly? George, over to you.
Great, well thank you so much, and just to start, a huge congratulations to WWF for this report. With the utmost sincerity, it's been instrumental, this series, to actually shaping the COP26 presidency agenda, and hugely welcome the fact that 92% of all NDCs include nature. It's absolutely fantastic. And I think what it also shows is that the world is starting to yield to the science, and as Anne said, it is incontrovertible, and we can't keep 1.5 degrees alive without radical action to protect and restore nature on an unprecedented scale. And also, as Anne pointed out, climate change and biodiversity are inseparable threats, and one cannot be tackled without tackling the other. And we're hugely grateful as well, and on behalf of the COP26 presidency, to IPBES for the joint workshop with IPCC, which makes the case in no uncertain terms for integrated action. And I think increasingly, more and more people are starting to recognise that when 23% of global emissions come from agriculture, forestry, other land use, that we simply cannot afford to ignore 23% of the problem. And actually, nature-based solutions contribute even more as a solution, as Marco said, about a third. So it really is important that we have the emphasis on this, and that's why, as part of our COP26 presidency, we have done our utmost to elevate nature right to the top of the agenda here in Glasgow, where it belongs, and really delighted that together with government, civil society organisations, businesses, everybody, that we've galvanised what we think are some game-changing commitments. I mean, numbers of today, you know, sort of now we're on over 130 countries, 90% of the world's forests have signed up to the Glasgow Declaration. Obviously, finance is flowing, and that's a key component of the report. We need more, but let's look at sort of some of the figures. $12 billion US from 12 donors in public finance, $7.2 billion of private finance. And crucially, we talk about it a lot around sort of systemic shifts, but what does that actually mean in practice? And we've got some good examples, you know, 30 institutions with 8.7 trillion assets under management committing to eliminate deforestation from their portfolios. A hugely welcome move, and together as a whole package. And I'm labouring on this not just because I think it is a landmark moment, but actually because there is a link here. You know, we have this sort of forest deal that was agreed at the World Leaders Summit, and you know, NDCs, this is one of the ways in which we can support some of the commitments, and also national adaptation plans, long-term strategies. It helps global recognition of nature-based solutions, but also it sends really clear demand signals. How we get more private finance, how we get a greater quantum of public finance. It's a really important recommendation in the report. We have tried to set an example on this internationally. We've already earmarked, the Prime Minister's earmarked £3 billion for nature. And looking ahead, tomorrow is Nature and Land Use Day here at COP, and we'll be looking at how we can broaden and deepen some of the commitments that we've already seen at the World Leaders Summit. So there will be 2 ministerial meetings, one on the forest, agriculture and commodities trade dialogue, and also one on the sustainable agriculture dialogue. And in the Fact One, we'll be looking to unpack that further and look at the specific actions that countries have agreed to break the link between commodity production and deforestation, including support for smallholders, including action on transparency and traceability in supply chains. And in the Sustainable Agriculture meeting, 30 ministers will launch 2 action agendas detailing their commitment to repurpose agricultural policies and also investing in agricultural research and development. And it won't just be a case of focusing exclusively on forests. There are various ocean action events that are going on today also. And then in terms of our own NDC in the domestic context, people will be aware that we've committed in our NDC to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030. And country context really matters here. And so in the UK, our focus will largely be on woodland and peatland restoration. And we've made specific commitments recently in additional plans, including to treble tree planting in England by the end of this Parliament. And also we've launched a new peat strategy as well. And this is underpinned domestically by new finance. So in our recently published net zero strategy, we've committed to boosting our Nature for Climate Fund by an additional £124 million as well. So this is an area that is really important to us. We can't overstate the role that nature-based solutions can play in tackling climate change, along with urgently decarbonising in all sectors. But I do think that we are starting to, an ambition loop is emerging where lots of different actors are starting to reinforce one another. And, you know, as the report shows, nature is a great ally in all of this. And I suppose, in conclusion, I'm looking at the words on the wall there, it's time to deliver. And we won't just deliver on tackling climate change and biodiversity loss, but also will help achieve all the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So very important: mitigation, adaptation, and development. So all of those interlinked. I have a few questions for the panelists, but I would like to turn to the floor in case there's any questions first. Please.
Ian Lumley from Ireland, where the particular top of the list issue we face in Ireland in climate is increasing agriculture emissions from dairy production, and parallel to that intensification is causing land use drainage, loss of peat soils, ammonia air pollution, biodiversity loss, nitrates in water. I could go on about that, but that's just in Ireland. Globally, the impact of animal agriculture is increasing. I was at a presentation this morning, 77% of global soya production, which is of course increasing, is going into animal feed rather than going into human nutrition. So the question I want to pose, particularly on the WWF side, is so much of the messaging we're getting from the global NGOs is about curtailing fossil fuels. We hear about divestment and removal of subsidy, and of course animal agriculture is massively subsidized, particularly in the EU. So when and how can we expect stronger messaging on the challenges of agriculture, and to be faced up to the fact that if we're really serious, we will have to start talking about targets like halving the impact of animal agriculture globally? When are we going to hear something like that within achievable time frames?
Thank you for the question, Ian. I think it goes to the heart of Marco. You wanna take it, Marco?
I'm happy to take it, and I think thank you very much for raising that issue. There is no doubt. I mean, I mentioned earlier very shortly the fact that amongst the different solutions to climate changing lifestyles, it's a critical one, and that doesn't only mean shift to renewable energy or reduce consumption of energy or other commodities. It's actually about a lot of other actions that we can take, addressing the key drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss. There is no doubt, and I'm going to be super clear about this, that a change in diet, a shift in diet that align human health, planetary health, is going to be a major part of the solution. And we know that particularly beef consumption and meat consumption in general, and the production of feed to sustaining animal farming, it is a major driver of emissions and a major driver of nature loss today. So that's clearly something that we have to tackle. Now, you know better than me that this is a very delicate issue. It also changes from country by country. There are places where meat production is done much more sustainably, others where it is totally unsustainable. And so the one-size-fits-all solution is difficult in this case, but there is no doubt that a change in diets, and so the consumption side of the story, is going to play a fundamental role. And that discussion is happening at different levels: European common policy, common agricultural policy reform, for example, the farm-to-fork policy of the new Green Deal in the European Union. It's pretty clear that this is an issue that needs to be tackled. And we're going to play our part to be reassured about that, because we recognize the issue is super important.
Thank you, Marco. Any, yes?
Hi, thank you. I'm Dr. Andrew Ramsey from University of Derby here in the UK. I also represent Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education. I'm wearing a badge today that I was given in 1973 by the WWF for fundraising when I was 7. One of the wonderful things that you hear at this COP is, well, two things you hear. You hear about nature-based solutions, which is fabulous, but you also hear about the optimism of youth and the ambition of youth. And I would just like to know what each of the organisations represented here today are doing to reach out and capture that enthusiasm, optimism and ambition of young people. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to take that, George and Abraham, probably both of you?
Yeah, no, definitely happy to. So, as you say, sort of the youth voice is absolutely, critical to all of this. Young people, make about 27% of the world, but, obviously the whole of the future. And so it's really important to us, and that's why tomorrow when we have our evening reception, The main focus will be a panel of young people, a call to action for government ministers and everybody else who's here. And it's really important that we elevate the voices of youth as part of this debate. So we're really keen to do that, and there will be a platform as part of Nature Day tomorrow in the evening, and really looking forward to that as well.
Thank you. If allowed, maybe I can touch on that too.
Yeah, of course.
And bringing it from some of the experiences that we have in Kenya. And this is a sad one that in 2019, we lost all 28 people to landslides and floods. And out of those 28 people, 22 are not accounted for. And all this is because of the unsustainable forms of agriculture that are being done along the escarpments and steep, slopy areas. And I remember even losing a family, a very young family. The father was 28 years, the mother was 26 years, and they had 2 children, 3 years and 2 months old, baby. And overnight, landslides, the mudslides, and they all died. And it was so painful even to see up in a tree a foot of a young child, whom 2 years down the line we have not been able to trace them. And the whole is because we blame it to the unsustainable forms of agriculture that are being done, especially in those developing countries, and Kenya to be very precise. And one of the solutions to this, I think, is livelihood diversifications. If we are able to diversify the kind of livelihoods that our people will be able to benefit, and we take them away from charcoal burning, we are able to even teach them on the sustainable forms of agriculture and even sustainable forms of even doing grazing. Are we able to move them from overgrazing, and we move them to dairy farming, where you can be able to rear 2 animals, take your milk to the market, and they are able to make a lot of money? Or wait for 3 years, you want to sell your bull, and you sell it at 30,000 Kenya shillings, and not able even to educate your child through high school, even for 1 academic year. Some of these things, the energy sources that are being used there, should we continue doing charcoal and firewood, or are we able to do even solar in terms of pumping water and even lighting our homes? I think these are some of the nature-based solutions that are there for us. And on the issue of youth, women, and people living with disabilities, I think this is a group that has not even been exploited so much back home. And I remember in our county, His Excellency the Governor has even empowered one of the women groups who are involved in alcohol brewing. And as we speak today, they have over 800,000 seedlings in their nurseries, and they have moved away from alcohol brewing and selling and even taking the alcohol, and now they are able to make a living out of doing their nursery bed for conservation issues. They are winning a lot of tenders from government, and they are able to even to educate their children and change their lives. Majority of them now are doing avocado farming. But if we can be able to replicate this to so many of these women and youth, I think we can be able to afford this 1.5 degrees rise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abraham. And I really like how the conversation pivoted towards systemic solutions, but also structural solutions. And definitely the subsidies piece and the changing consumptions patterns are structural solutions. So I'd like to hear one last remark from each of you, going probably from George back to Marco, and then hopefully, if we have time, we'll show a 2-minute video from Kenya. So over to you, George. What can happen here to do a stepwise approach on this agenda and tackling the big challenges and the structural things that we need to push? Over back to you.
Great. No, thank you very much. I mean, I think that like I said sort of earlier, I really do think that we are now in an ambition loop. I think this has been a long time coming and lots of work, and I think that there are a lot of commitments that are being made here in Glasgow on nature-based solutions, in particular on protecting forests and ending deforestation. And now the focus has to be on delivery, holding people to the promises that have been made here in Glasgow, governments, businesses, everybody who's part of this agenda. And obviously now we're in a position, the report is clear on 92% of all NDCs, including nature. And so as new commitments come forward, as finance starts to flow, I think we need to see, as the report says, we need more money, more climate finance going to nature because it's a critical solution. And we need to make sure that it's going to the right places, and we need to make sure that we're involving the people who know the most and also are sort of best situated to help guide some of this. In particular, we've obviously had quite a big focus on Indigenous peoples and on local communities. So really good to see the report. We are obviously heading, I think, in the right direction, but now we need to get on and deliver. Thanks.
Thank you, George. And Anne, I am so sorry. You're sitting on top of my head, and you could have gotten some of the questions. I am so glad you're still here with us. So back to you, Anne. What can you tell us as last remarks and kind of your message to governments here at COP?
Well, perhaps just reflecting on the last question there, I would like to reflect on the fact that the youth are really not add-ons to this conversation about this crisis. They are the most affected by all of this. They need proper seats at the table, and also to advocate as equals and as IBES within the context of our activities as a scientific panel. We have already actioned this belief, and we have an early career program where we really involve early career scientists into all of our scientific assessment reports as full authors and vital contributors to the important scientific reports that we produce both on climate change and on biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Any final words, Abraham?
Mine is to WWF. Thank you for the good work that you're doing. This is one of the best reports that I've ever read. May God bless you so much. But to all of us, every climate promise must be kept. Every climate promise must be kept. So as we move out of COP26 today, the biggest reward is, as even we run the race to zero, let us keep our promises on climate. Thank you.
Marco, you want to say any last words?
My last word is that I think we should all celebrate the way how nature has risen to the top of the political, social, societal, and corporate agenda. We've been waiting for a long time to see nature so well integrated to the climate discussion, to the development discussion, and recognize the contribution nature is making to all these challenges. In fact, recognizing nature is the foundation for the solution of all these challenges. We're not going to have a prosperous, equitable future in a degraded planet. It's clear, crystal clear to everyone, whether we talk about climate or biodiversity, on land and in the ocean. Nature has moved, the perception of nature has moved from a moral issue, which is still very important because of the intrinsic value of nature, the rights of nature, to coexist with us on the planet. But has moved to actually recognizing nature as an economic challenge, an opportunity, as a social challenge, as a health challenge and opportunity, as an equity and justice challenge and opportunities, because the future generations and the most vulnerable population of today are going to be affected the most. So this is a cultural evolution in the way we look at nature, and I think it's the foundation for the change that we want to see post COP26, post many other events that will happen in the next several months. You mentioned the optimism of the youth. I think we need to be optimistic because we're seeing finally, and we know why, because the crisis is deepening, but we're seeing finally the response emerging, bolder than ever, clearer than ever, and we have to hold everybody accountable now to deliver it. And everybody, including all of us as individuals, consumers in this room. So an exciting time, a long, tough journey ahead to deliver a net zero, carbon neutral, net nature positive future, but I think it has never been a more exciting time for me, and I joined WWF when I was 12 years old, so it's been a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, Anne, Hasib, Abraham, George. Thank you so much for being here. If you can stay 2 minutes for the Kenya video, that would be fantastic.
If you look for an excuse to skip training, you'll find one. It's always sitting somewhere in your mind, waiting for you to trigger it. That's why I don't run with my legs, but with my heart and my mind. One thing that motivates me every morning to kick off the blanket, even when my legs say I don't want to, is the mantra, no more excuses. For the last 17 years, I've been training in fresh and unique high-altitude hair of Kaptagat forests in my homeland, Kenya. Unfortunately, the forest is disappearing. The natural systems that provide us fresh air and water are being destroyed. The trees I would sit or stretch under their shade are now stumps. Training routes that were once green are farms. The rivers are drying up. We urgently need a shift. We have to make our food production sustainable. Support communities and families who depend on wood for fuel to transition to clean energy solutions. For the sustainable global economy to shift, together we must transform food and financial systems, move rapidly to renewable energy, embrace nature-based solutions, and help nature to recover. No more excuses.
Thanks, everyone, for being with us today.